Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most baffling and honestly heartbreaking unsolved mysteries in American history. It's a story that starts with a terrible fire, but ends with a lifetime of unanswered questions. So, let's set the scene. It's Christmas Eve, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia. The Sodder family home is destroyed by a fire. But here's the thing. In the chaos and aftermath, 5 of their 9 children who were home that night, they're just gone. Vanished. All right, so it all begins on what should have been a really happy night. The kids convinced their mom, Jenny, to let them stay up late to play with some new toys. You know, a totally normal, festive family evening that was about to turn into an absolute nightmare. Now, what's so wild is how a series of really strange events played out in less than 2 hours. It all kicks off at 12:30 in the morning. A weird phone call wakes Jenny up. It's a woman she doesn't know, asking for someone she's never heard of, with party noises in the background. Just a half hour later, she hears a loud thump on the roof. And then, at 1:30 a.m., she wakes up again, this time to the smell of smoke. The house is on fire. This is where it gets even crazier. As George, Jenny, and 4 of their kids scramble outside, they realize that every single thing they try to do to rescue the other kids is impossible. The phone to call for help? Dead. The ladder they always kept leaning against the house? It's gone. The family's 2 work trucks, which they could have used to climb up to the kids' window, neither one would start, even though they were working just fine the day before. And the fire department? It took them hours to show up. So what did the authorities do? Well, with the house now just a smoldering ruin, officials moved incredibly fast to just close the book on this. The fire marshal's office basically came to an immediate conclusion. It was faulty wiring. But this was the first thing that just didn't sit right with George Sodder. See, he had just had the whole house professionally rewired and inspected, and the electric company had literally just given it the all clear. So the official story was wrapped up in a neat little bow. It was a tragic accident, and the 5 missing kids, Maurice, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, they all died in the fire. The fire chief insisted the fire was so hot it completely cremated them, which is why no bones or anything were found. And just 5 days later, that was it. Death certificates were issued. Case closed. But for George and Jennie Sodder, this was far from over. The official story just felt wrong. As they started looking into it themselves, they began to uncover piece after piece of evidence that seemed to poke holes in pretty much everything the authorities had said. Okay, first big question, that faulty wiring theory. If an electrical fire was tearing through the walls of the house, how on earth did the family's Christmas lights stay on while the fire was just getting started? It just doesn't add up. And then there's this claim that the fire was hot enough to completely destroy the children's bodies. Jennie Sodder just could not believe that. I mean, they found household appliances and parts of the tin roof in the ash, things that are way less durable than human bone. She even called a crematorium expert who told her that bones will still remain even after being burned at 2,000 degrees for hours. That's way hotter and for way longer than their house fire. And the phone line being dead, the Sodders thought, okay, it must have just burned in the fire. But a repairman came out and confirmed that no, it wasn't burned at all. Someone had physically climbed a 14-foot pole and cut it. And the more they looked, the more disturbing it got. That missing ladder, it was found thrown into an embankment about 75 feet away. A bus driver came forward and said he saw people throwing what he called balls of fire at the house. The family even found this weird hard rubber object in the yard, kind of like the casing for a firebomb. And maybe the most chilling part? An insurance salesman who had actually threatened George before, saying his house would go up in smoke because of his anti-Mussolini views, was on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. Right then and there, convinced their children had been taken and that the fire was just a diversion, George and Jennie Sodder started a search that would literally consume the rest of their lives. They couldn't bring themselves to rebuild on the property. Instead, they turned it into a memorial garden, and in 1952, they put up this huge billboard right along the main highway with pictures of their 5 missing kids, making sure no one would ever forget what happened. And on that billboard, they offered a reward. It started at $5,000, but they eventually doubled it to $10,000. I mean, you have to realize that was an absolute fortune back then. They were desperate for any piece of information. So, frustrated that the officials weren't doing anything, the Sodders just took matters into their own hands. In 1949, they hired their own pathologist and paid for a new, really thorough excavation of the fire site. And this new dig actually turned up some stuff, some coins, a dictionary. But then they found something that seemed huge, a few small bone fragments, which were quickly identified as human vertebrae. It looked like they might finally have some answers. So they sent the bones off to the Smithsonian Institution for analysis. But the report that came back was an absolute bombshell. Not only did the bones belong to someone who was about 16 or 17 years old, older than their oldest missing son, but the expert concluded that the bones showed no sign of exposure to flame. In other words, whoever these bones belonged to, they hadn't died in that fire. The years just kept rolling by, full of false leads and crushing disappointments. But then, in 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, a mysterious letter showed up that gave the family a huge surge of hope. The envelope was postmarked from Kentucky. Inside, there was a photo of a young man, maybe in his late 20s, who looked so much like their son Louis. And on the back was this cryptic, handwritten message: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, and then a string of numbers. The family hired a private investigator to check it out, but he took their money and just disappeared. Still, the Sodders put an enlarged copy of that photo on their mantelpiece, holding on to that belief. George Sodder passed away in 1969, and Jennie followed in 1989. They both went to their graves, never knowing for sure what happened to their children. But the mystery they left behind, it continues to fascinate and baffle people to this day. So where does that leave us? Well, there are a few main theories. The simplest one is the official story. The kids died in the fire, and all the weird stuff, the cut phone line, the missing ladder, it's all just a string of bizarre coincidences. But for a lot of people, the evidence screams kidnapping, maybe as retaliation for George's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. Others think the Sicilian mafia was involved. And then there's a theory some of the surviving family members hold, that the children did survive, and they just never made contact to protect the rest of the family from harm. But at the end of the day, while we can all debate the facts and the theories, the Sodder family themselves never had any doubt. For George, for Jennie, and for their surviving children, there was no question. They believed until the day they died that the 5 children who disappeared that Christmas Eve were still out there somewhere. And that really is the question we're left with, isn't it? Was it a terrible accident made worse by a sloppy investigation? Or was it a sinister, calculated plot to abduct 5 children using a fire as a cover? After all this time, the truth is still out there, a chilling reminder of one of America's most enduring and heartbreaking mysteries.